From 1977 through the 80s and the 90s, Kemper Arena in Kansas City personified Big 8 basketball as the home of the Big 8 postseason tournament. And it is here where we begin our celebration of Big 8 basketball tradition. For almost a century, Big 8 basketball has captured the emotion of fans in America's heartland. Whether it be the stifling defense of Henry Iba's Oklahoma State Cowboys or the graceful dominance of Kansas' Danny Manning, Big 8 basketball has evoked remarkable passion among its followers. Never mind the winter chill in the air, inside the gyms and arenas, the action ignited the fervor of a loyal following that has been there, win or lose, for years.
The day that I played my first game in Allen Fieldhouse was something incredibly special, but the night that I played my first game against K-State was something that it still brings chills to my bones.
Our fans from Oklahoma pulled for Kansas when they played Duke in the semifinals because we really thought it would be neat and be a great tribute to our league if we had two teams in the finals, and that was true.
It's hard to say that anyone is better than anyone else consistently. But I think we had a run in the Big 8 of about 4 or 5 years where we were the best. From top to bottom, there was nothing compared to it.
The origin of the league dates back to 1907 when Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, Iowa, and Washington University formed the forerunner of the Big 8. The Missouri Valley Intercollegiate Athletic Association, or the MVIAA. While the conference was in its infancy, so too was the sport of basketball. It was during this time the league featured many of the sport's pioneers. After inventing the game of basketball in 1891, Dr. James Naismith introduced it to the Big 8 region near the turn of the century. As an instructor at Kansas, his primary goal was to provide a physical activity for students between the fall and spring. Oddly enough, in 7 years as head coach, Naismith won less than half his games, but his creation eventually became a sport played around the world. By 1928, the league evolved into a 6-team alliance of Iowa State, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, and Oklahoma. Although officially still the MVIAA, fans and media alike called it the Big Six.
Come on, boys, this is it. Let's go. Come on, let's go.
Kansas won or shared 13 league titles prior to the formation of the Big Six and maintained the dominance in its new alignment. Head coach Phog Allen directed the Jayhawks to 12 titles in 19 years of the 6-team format. Oklahoma won 6 league championships in that period, including 5 under Bruce Drake. The conference also made its mark nationally when the NCAA tournament began in the late 30s.
Well, they established the NCAA tournament. Dr. Allen was on that committee, and the first, as I said, the first game was the final game in Evanston, and Oregon State won. But they lost money, and there was some question, as I remember his telling me, that they, should they go on with the game. So he stepped in and said to them that if they would let him be in charge of the game in Kansas City, he would guarantee them that they would make at least $10,000. So they finally decided to do that, and he took on that responsibility and was kind of the general manager of the tournament too. But they did make $10,000, and that was a very important time for the growth of the NCAA.
Through the years, the Big 8 and its predecessors have been home to some of the game's top coaching minds. After succeeding James Naismith, his former student, Phog Allen took the sport to a new level. An osteopathic doctor, Allen was innovative in both the physical and mental approach to the game.
Well, he was a chiropractor, and he had this ability to save you from your injuries more than most people. We had a trainer, but Doc was, very, very, he was renowned for his abilities as a chiropractor.
One of Allen's contemporaries who had a dramatic influence on the game was Henry Iba. Reverently referred to as Mr. Iba, his defensive expertise was without equal. His offense wasn't too bad either,
We played Pepperdine once and had a coach named Duck Dow that a lot of people gave him credit for the passing game, innovation, their start. But I can remember Henry Ibe yelling out his kids' passing game way back in the 50s. So, nothing's new in this crazy business.
Mr. Ibe was so misinterpreted through the years for playing slow basketball. It wasn't playing slow basketball. He just wanted to be in control of things. And I think that any coach in any game, any team sport, the team that is in control of the game has the best chance of winning the game.
Never a time in our basketball do you play here against the zone. Never. Now, if you don't know that much, you're in trouble this late.
Iba directed Oklahoma State to national titles in 45 and 46 and is the only person ever to coach 3 United States Olympic teams. Iba spent 36 years at Oklahoma State, and his record makes him the nation's 3rd winningest coach, behind Adolph Rupp and Dean Smith, who ironically both played at Kansas under Phog Allen.
Many of the things that we do in the game today are his ideas, his innovations, particularly on defense. And more importantly than that, he had such an impact on so many coaches today, guys that played for him, who later became coaches, who have later in turn influenced other coaches. The Henry Iba tree just goes on and on and on.
Trailing only Allen and Iba in conference tenure is Missouri's Norm Stewart. A hard-nosed all-conference player for the Tigers in the 50s, Stewart's 29th season at Missouri coincided with the final year of the league. He won 8 league titles, 6 postseason crowns, and has been named National Coach of the Year twice in his career. Kansas State's program blossomed under such coaching greats as Jack Gardner, Tex Winter, Cotton Fitzsimmons, and Jack Hartman. Gardner took the Wildcats to the Final Four in 48 and 51. In 1954, Tex Winter succeeded Gardner and for the next 15 years won 8 league titles, reached the Final Four twice, and was National Coach of the Year in 1958. Jack Hartman took over in 1971. An Iba protege, Hartman is widely regarded for his ability to mold average talent into champions.
Coach very definitely felt that each player brought something different to the table. Not everyone was capable of doing exactly the same thing, so he oftentimes did a terrific job of casting his players in specific roles, expecting people to score that could score to score, and those that could rebound to rebound, and consequently his teams often played better than maybe what maybe people expected. Again, the whole is much more impressive maybe than what the individual abilities might have led you to believe. Everything Coach did, really centered around, I think, his learning from Mr. Iba. I think maybe more than anything else, when we thought 2-a-day practices were pretty tough, he would always threaten us with the possibility of coming back for a 3rd practice, as they did in Mr. Iba's days.
Eddie Sutton proved you can go home as the former Oklahoma State standout returned to his alma mater in 1991. In leading the Cowboys to the 1995 Final Four, he became the only coach ever to take 4 different teams to the NCAA tournament. A testament to the Kansas tradition is the fact that only 7 men have headed that program in its entire history. One of those men, Dick Harp, had to replace a legend, succeeding Phog Allen in the mid-50s. Harp spent 8 years as head coach at Kansas, winning 2 league titles and advancing to the NCAAs twice. The Jayhawks again turned to an assistant when Ted Owens was promoted in 1964. His 19 seasons produced 6 league titles, 7 NCAA bids, and 2 trips to the Final Four. Larry Brown replaced Owens in 1984 and in 5 seasons made the NCAA tournament each year, highlighted by the 1988 National Championship and a National Coach of the Year award. Brown's successor wasn't a household name when he got the job, but in his first 7 years, Roy Williams led the Jayhawks to 4 league titles, 2 Final Four appearances, and has twice been named National Coach of the Year. Iowa State and Oklahoma revived their programs in the early 80s with the hiring of two of the game's more flamboyant coaches. The Cyclones lured Johnny Orr from Michigan in 1981, and he made the NCAA tournament 6 times in 14 years. But Orr's greatest impact may have been at the gate. Hilton Coliseum crowd shot up from an average of 6,000 to regular sellouts of 14,000. In the early 80s, Billy Tubbs brought an up-tempo philosophy to the Big Eight, and as a result, the Sooners set virtually every conference team scoring record. From 1983 to 1990, his teams averaged 29 wins a season, and in 1988 advanced to the finals of the NCAA tournament against another Big Eight team, Kansas. From Naismith to Tubbs and everyone in between, this league's great tradition has certainly been built from the top down. The MVIAA became a 7-team league in 1948 as Colorado joined the fold. And just as they did with the Big Six, fans and media quite naturally called this conglomeration the Big Seven. Kansas State made the Final Four 3 times in the Big Seven era. The 1951 team may have been the best ever at K-State, advancing to the NCAA Finals before losing to Kentucky. Longtime Wildcat followers still wonder what might have happened if Ernie Barrett hadn't injured his shoulder the week before.
I kept asking Coach Gardner to shoot it with Novocaine. And it was kind of funny because in those days, Novocaine was not a proven drug to help injuries, and he said it might be injurious to my shoulder and would hurt my chances of playing pro ball, and so as a result, he wouldn't shoot it, and I couldn't even raise my left arm. He did give me the opportunity to start the ball game against Kentucky. I think I scored 4 points, but I felt many times that if I'd have been healthy, we could have won the ball game.
The success of both Kansas and Kansas State in the 50s led to both schools building new facilities. In 1950, Kansas State opened Ahern Fieldhouse, its 12,000-seat capacity, replacing the 2,800-seat Nichols Gymnasium. In 1955, Kansas dedicated Allen Fieldhouse to an overflow crowd of 17,228. Named in honor of head coach Phog Allen, it was the nation's second largest on-campus facility at the time. Kansas topped Kansas State's 1951 trip to the Final Four by winning it all in 1952. Behind national scoring leader and player of the year Clyde LaVellette, the Jayhawks defeated St. John's in the finals.
And when he came here, one of the things he couldn't do well was that he had never done much but shoot the ball around the basket. And so the most significant thing we did the summer before we started playing, we spent the summer helping him to shoot the hook shot, which became his mark.
LaVellette began a string of impressive big men patrolling the pivot for Kansas in the 50s. In 1955, Phog Allen reached the state-imposed mandatory retirement age of 70, closing out an incredible career. But his legacy continued as his assistant Dick Harp took over the program.
Occasionally we'd be talking about basketball or something, and I would be talking about something that we might change or do, and he said yes, but he'd always remind me that the fundamentals of the game were the thing that was going to win and lose for you. And that was his great strength throughout his coaching career. But he had the whole package, you know. He was not only a teacher of basketball, but he was a friend to all the young men that played for him, and he was instrumental in many of their lives because they had confidence in him.
Harp's transition was made smoother by the presence of Wilt Chamberlain patrolling the lane. Chamberlain put together staggering totals as a sophomore and junior. He averaged 30 points and 18 rebounds per game, and his presence was nothing short of imposing.
We were ahead at halftime, 29-28, and I remember I told him, and Chamberlain hadn't done much, and we were playing man-to-man, and we had a 6'6" center that couldn't jump very good, and I said, "See, and so tough." Well, the second half, I think he got 40 points, and
we got clobbered, and I think that's the last time that anybody played a man-to-man defense against him.
And he's entering through the tunnel, coming out, and we're on the court. And I hear this buzzing with the fans, boo, 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 and the Kansas coming out, and they're all waiting for Wilt. And I was always taught not to give the other team much attention, but I couldn't help it. And I looked over there, and I looked down, and then I kept going up, 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 and finally I found Wilt up at the top. And he was the biggest basketball player at that time I'd ever seen. And to tell you how he affected the game, we had read how he blocked so many shots coming into that tournament in the preseason. And we had a little offensive play for myself where I hit the post man and rubbed off him, got the ball back, and got the shot. And I said to myself, Wilt Chamberlain is not going to block my first shot. And when I go off that pick, he's going to try and block it, and I'm going to hit the guy on the pick and roll. Well, Wilt, I went up for the shot, and Wilt just stayed back and did nothing. I had nowhere to go. I threw the ball at the basket, didn't even hit the rim. I was lucky to hit the backboard.
Wilt may have rejected him, but it was one of the few Gary Thompson had blocked in his outstanding career. He was Iowa State's first 1,000-point scorer and was an All-American in 1957. He later became a very popular television commentator for Big 8 basketball.
The 50s was a great era for Big 8 basketball at that time, or then was Big 7, because I think you'll find that that era in the 50s produced as many top 10 teams and as many All-Americans, and the highest finish in the Final Four in that era as any era in the Big 8 or the Big 7. So it was a great time, and the intensity was no different in those days as it is now as far as competing against each other.
How many times is a game hinged on one tick of the clock? In an instant, emotions can run the gamut from despair to jubilation. Here's a look at some of the buzzer beaters which have become part of the legend of Big 8 basketball.
64-61 Missouri, 2 seconds to go. Cowboys with the basketball. Reeves.
He made it! We are going to overtime!
Oh my goodness! Can you believe it?
No. His first three-pointer of the season.
And we'll take a look at it again as the clock starts when Reeves first touches it. And what do we have? The two big men with three-pointers. Javon Crudup from 20 feet and Big Country Reeves from 35 feet.
Oklahoma State went on to win in overtime. Some Cowboy fans argue that the shot actually came 15 years earlier. On December 6, 1980, Eddie Hannon's shot at the buzzer gave Oklahoma State a one-point overtime win over defending national champion Louisville. Since the league expanded to 8 teams in 1959, Missouri remains the only school to win 4 straight conference titles. The Tigers won the last of those in 1983, securing the title on March 1st.
Dribbles through the legs, on a bounce to Sunville with 4 seconds left. Sunville fakes, goes up with the shot. It's in! Time runs out! It's in! The basket counts, and the Tigers win! 49-47 on a forced shot by John Sunville. As time ran out, Mizzou wins by 2 over K-State. And Missouri fans, you have the first 4-time Big 8 champion.
It's doubtful that any program played the underdog role any better than Kansas State under Jack Hartman. Such was the case in 1981 in the NCAA tournament when the Wildcats shocked second-ranked Oregon State on Rolando Blackman's baseline jumper at the buzzer.
There was over a minute left, and we called timeout. That minute and 15 seconds or whatever it was maybe the longest minute and 15 seconds I've ever spent, because we were just handling the ball, working it, trying to keep the ball moving, not giving them an opportunity to foul us, because we didn't want them to put us on the line. But we had to make the foul shots, but at least it gave them the ball again. So we ran the clock down, and with 10 seconds we went into our movement to clear the side, and Rolando went down the right baseline, and with 2 seconds on the clock, he hit one of the biggest baskets that's ever been made in certainly Kansas State basketball history, and maybe NCAA basketball history.
Oklahoma State rejoined the conference in 1959, raising the membership to 8. While the group was known informally as the Big Eight, it was not until 1964 that the name officially switched from the MVIAA to the Big Eight. Kansas State won the first Big Eight championship in 1959, breezing through the league with a perfect 14-0 mark. Bob Boozer averaged 25 points a game and was an All-American for the second time. In 1964, Kansas State started the season unranked, but stormed to the Final Four behind Willie Morrell. A devastating inside player, Morrell was named NCAA Regional MVP. It was the Big Eight's 17th appearance in the Final Four. Just a few years from retirement, Henry Iba led Oklahoma State to the 1965 Big Eight Championship, winning 3 league games in overtime. In an interview just before he retired, Mr. Iba talked about his affinity for good, sound defense and where that came from.
We lost the ball game 62-14. I'll always remember that. Riding back home, and by the way, we traveled by truck in those days, and we'd all ride in the truck. And going back home, I kept going over that ball game in my mind, and I thought to myself, well, there's just another way to play this game. There's no reason for anybody to be beaten that badly. And I think that is the day the defense happened to come into my mind, and I tried to figure the different ways that you could play defense that would cut down on the number of shots that a team would get and give you an opportunity, if you didn't have a good team, to stay at least in the running of the ball game.
Ted Owens, in his second year at Kansas, took his first Big Eight title in 1966 with a 13-1 conference record. But that season may best be remembered for the basket that didn't count. Trailing Texas El Paso by 1 in the second overtime of the regional final, JoJo White's buzzer shot gave Kansas an apparent victory and a trip to the Final Four. But the officials ruled White stepped out of bounds, disallowing the basket and sending the Jayhawks home. The 1967 season saw a repeat of the previous one, as Kansas was again league champ with a 13-1 record. They had an identical 23-4 overall mark. In '68, Kansas State gave Tex Winter a grand send-off, winning the league title by a game over Kansas. It was also a milestone year for Missouri hoop history, as athletic director Dan Devine called on native son Norm Stewart to turn the program around.
Norm Stewart came back to a school to resurrect a program that literally had been in ashes. Missouri had only won 6 games in 2 seasons.
I think any time you have an opportunity to return and coach at your alma mater, it's a great thrill, but it's a great privilege, and it's a tremendous responsibility. Fortunately for me, it's been a good fit.
The 1969 season saw one of the league's greatest turnarounds, as Colorado won the title just 1 year after finishing last and winning just 3 league games. The turnaround was largely due to sophomore Cliff Mealy. He was Big Eight MVP in just his first season.
To lead the Big Eight in scoring and rebounding, and to be named the valuable player at the end of the year, I mean, that's like a dream come true. And considering what the trials I went through as a senior in high school, where I hurt my knee and didn't finish my high school career, but Colorado still recruited me, and to go on to junior college after that injury, and to be All-American in junior college, and to follow that up with coming here and winning the Big Eight championship, it was like I was floating like a helium balloon. It was just a great feeling for me at that young, tender age.
God gave him some ability that he could, he was a player, you know. It wasn't a coaching, let me put it that way. Well, the best thing, you know, we did with him was just don't tell him anything.
In 1970, Kansas State reclaimed the top spot in the league behind colorful Cotton Fitzsimmons. In 1971, a veteran Kansas team won the Big Eight with a 14-0 conference record and was 27-1 overall and ranked 4th in both polls. Kansas State was Big Eight champ in '72 and '73. The back-to-back titles enhanced the reputation of Jack Hartman, who was only in his 3rd season at K-State.
I think it got me off on the right foot, of course, because I was still a newcomer, so to speak, at Kansas State, and Kansas State basketball fans are very knowledgeable, and they're very concerned about the welfare of their program, and they wanted to see somebody that could produce, and So it was a big help to me to win those championships back-to-back, second, third year.
The heart of that team was Lon Kruger, an athletic point guard who was the league MVP in '73 and '74. Kruger was the definitive coach on the floor, able to control the game at both ends. A decade later, he reappeared on the Wildcat bench as Hartman's assistant and eventually became his successor.
I wasn't consciously thinking about coaching, but I think as you look back on it, you know, Coach Hartman afforded me the opportunity to have a little bit more insight as to why we were doing things as opposed to just doing it because he said to do it.
After 2 straight sub-500 seasons, Kansas came back to win consecutive Big 8 titles in 1974 and '75. In '74, Kansas lost only 1 league game behind a pair of 6'10 juniors, Danny Knight and Rick Suttle. In the NCAAs, Kansas came back from 5 down late to beat Eddie Sutton's Creighton Blue Jays by a point. Then, Oral Roberts, playing on its home court, had a 9-point lead with less than 5 minutes left. But Kansas scored the last 7 points of regulation to send the game into overtime and eventually won 93-90 to make the Final Four for the second time in 4 years.
Just because of our age and the time period, the free spirit attitude about everything in America, we didn't realize what we'd done. You know, we went back to our Holiday Inn and looked at each other. Hey, we're going to the Final Four. This is, and of course, the Final Four wasn't quite as big a deal back then as it is now, at least through the media and the public perception. It was huge to us players. I'm sure it's as big to us, or it was as big to us as it is to the kids today, but now it's a media circus in one of the great sporting events in the world. Then we stayed in a Holiday Inn in Greensboro, North Carolina, you know, out of town. People had to drive around looking for where we were. There wasn't any media around to, you know, bug you. These guys come down today and they step in a hotel lobby and they can't walk 3 feet. You know, it wasn't like that then, but it was a tremendous feeling. We felt a great reward for a year that we worked very hard, and we regret the way it ended. I mean, to go down there and lose 2 games is not what you want, but hey, as we look back at it, you know, 20 years later, it was a great accomplishment and something that everyone on that team is very proud of.
1976 was a memorable year for the country and for Missouri fans as the Tigers won their first conference title in 36 years. Norm Stewart had taken over a struggling program in 1968 and wasted little time challenging for the title. Led by sharpshooting All-American Willie Smith, Missouri won the league at 12-2 and made it all the way to the regional finals before losing to Michigan. The loss came despite a 43-point performance by Smith, 29 of those points in the second half.
It's kind of interesting that in those days there would be a player as good as Willie was, and still the country didn't know that much about him. I can recall staying outside the Missouri locker room after that game and a writer from Washington, D.C. saying to Norm Stewart, the Missouri coach, well, who is this Willie Smith and why haven't we heard about him? Now imagine that in today's world of college basketball with the television that we have and all of the coverage of it. That's unheard of. I mean, everybody knows who everybody is, but that gives you a little idea of how regionalized basketball was in the mid-'70s. It was just beginning to get on a roll.
In 1977, Kansas State didn't have a starter taller than 6'5", but incredibly won its last 8 league games to win the title. Mike Evans shared the league MVP honors that season before winning it all by himself in '78. The 1977 season also brought about a significant change for the Big 8, the inaugural Big 8 postseason tournament. The tournament was a big hit right from the start, but a lot of its success had to do with another event, the Big 8 Holiday Tournament that was played right here at the old Municipal Auditorium in Kansas City for 29 years before moving over the hill to Kemper Arena in the mid-'70s. In 1946, the Big 6 brought in 2 outside schools as invited guests. That guaranteed each team 3 games. But the appeal of the tournament was much the action off the court as on it.
I still miss that tournament. Those were some great times. The hotel would set up a hospitality room, and after the games, everybody came back, you know, from Kemper to the Alameda Plaza, and everybody would gather in the hospitality room and replay the games. It was great, you know, everybody had a good time.
Perhaps in part due to the tremendous popularity of the holiday tournament, league approval for the postseason tournament did not come easily.
Well, there was a great deal of opposition to the postseason tournament in those days because everybody loved the Christmas tournament, they called it, the preseason tournament. It was a tournament that people enjoyed going to Kansas City and Christmas shopping and things like that, that the postseason tournament does not allow.
Some of the coaches didn't want to do this. They thought that that this was going to wear down their teams before they went into the NCAA tournament, and they also thought that maybe it was going to force them to play one team too many times, you know, in a season.
Despite opposition, the postseason classic was finally approved and began in 1977. The following year, despite a losing regular season record, Norm Stewart guided his club through 3 upsets in 3 days by a total of 8 points.
I think Missouri had lost 7 of 8 games going into the Big 8 tournament, and certainly was not expected to do that much. But in what you might say was typical Norm Stewart fashion, you know, he got those kids ready, and these things can happen when you get to tournament time. You know, you can get hot real quick.
Missouri's surprising victory was just one factor that contributed to the Big 8 postseason event becoming an instant hit with fans.
People really look forward to being there. They look forward to all the social activities that surround it. They look forward to seeing all 7 schools there. The coaches enjoy that, even though they don't admit it. I think they really enjoy being in that atmosphere, and I think it's really special.
The one negative aspect of the postseason event was that it eventually meant the end of the holiday tournament and the end of a memorable era.
It's too bad we couldn't continue, but I understand with the way things go now and new regimes and the new tournaments in the NCAA that you almost have to go to postseason instead of the preseason. But it was a moneymaker. It was always sold out. It was a lot of fun.
The decade of the 70s was a dynamic one in college basketball. The NCAA tournament field was expanded, TV coverage increased, and attendance and interest skyrocketed. The Big 8 mirrored that growth and made the commitment to compete nationally. One tangible sign was the new facilities that opened in the 70s. Iowa State's Hilton Coliseum in 1972, Missouri's Hearns Center in 1973, Oklahoma's Lloyd Noble Center in 76, Nebraska's Devaney Center in 77, and Colorado's Events Center in 1979.
When I came in here in 1973-74, we played at Colorado's old place, which, you know, at the end of the baskets, the end of the court, under each basket had a hurricane fence with a few pads over it, and I can't believe the place seated more than 4,000 people.
You had lots of arenas in the league at that time that needed either to be remodeled or just needed new places. The old Coliseum at Nebraska was built like a bowling alley. It was very, very skinny and old, and the old Armory at Ames, the Brewer Fieldhouse at Missouri, Ahern Fieldhouse at Kansas State. To the purists, through the years, they probably would not like to see some of these buildings go, because a lot of them, besides all of the many ghosts that resided there, great basketball had been played in all of these buildings, great players through the years. A lot of them weren't large enough to hold the kind of crowds that wanted to come and see college basketball as it began to grow in the 70s.
You know, athletics, college athletics and basketball in general started to wake up in the 70s and saw the types of revenues that could be generated, the types of school spirit and togetherness that could be created through college basketball, and I think it was a natural step for the Big 8 to move up.
The Big Eight made great strides in the 1960s and 70s, but in the 80s, the league really took off. One sign of progress was Missouri's 1979 recruiting coup of John Sundvold and Steve Stepanovich. With Stepanovich and Sundvold in the fold, the Tigers won the league by 3 games in 1980 and advanced to the Sweet 16. The highlight of that season was an overtime win over Notre Dame in the second round of the NCAA, and that featured a 32-point outburst by unheralded Mark Dressler and a school record 12 assists by Larry Drew. In 1981, Missouri won its second straight title, finishing just a game ahead of Kansas, Kansas State, and Nebraska. But just as significant was the arrival of Johnny Orr at Iowa State and Billy Tubbs at Oklahoma, changing the league in a big way.
I remember in coming to the league, the feedback that I had from a lot of people was that the style of play that we brought into the league would never work in the Big Eight. It would never win consistently in the Big Eight because it had been tried before.
I remember going to the first Big Eight meeting. They said, hey, you're not going to be able to run in the Big Eight. They said the officials won't let you run.
I really felt that if we got the kind of players we would like to have, that we could play any way we wanted to in the league. So it was never a conscious effort to try to change the league. We just brought in our style of play to try to make it work because that would work best for us.
Within 3 or 4 years, all the teams in the Big Eight were running, and it became the highest scoring conference in the United States for about 5 or 6 years in a row.
In 1982, Missouri won its 3rd straight league championship behind Stepanovich and Sundvold, who were now juniors.
57-56, John Sundvold with the ball in the back court. He's hounded by Livingston, brings it up, pulls up short of the timeline, pivots, passes down low, Stepanovich is open, he stuffs it in! A big bucket for Steeple! The Tigers remain unbeaten.
The Tigers won their first 19 games and were finally getting some much-deserved national publicity for the conference.
The coaches screamed a lot about the fact that nobody knew who they were in the Big Eight, and Norm Stewart told a Sports Illustrated writer, Kirkpatrick, once that he said, you know, we think we got pretty good basketball back here in the Big Eight Conference. A lot of our writers feel that way. But the thing is, he says, the Shelbyville County Herald doesn't go national. And so, you know, that was his way of telling Curry Kirkpatrick that the people in the East Coast were missing a good thing.
The Tigers went into the 1983 season gunning for their 4th straight title with an experienced team that believed in each other and in their coach.
We remember in Hawaii, a tournament situation early in the season in Hawaii, we were working out and we had a tough workout. Norm Stewart ran us real good at the end of the practice. And we watched the other teams there practicing. And we watched as they worked out at the end of their practice. They didn't have to run as hard. Theirs was a little easier. And that was kind of a message, actually, as a player, something in our head that, hey, it was December, a long way to go in the season. We're going to be prepared to play anybody and beat anybody.
Missouri got that unprecedented 4th straight conference title with a 2-game advantage over Oklahoma and its rising star, Wayman Tisdale. Just like Stepanovich 4 years earlier, Tisdale's signing at Oklahoma showed the rest of the country that the Big Eight could land the nation's best. Missouri's streak was broken in 1984 by Oklahoma, as Tisdale was the league MVP for the 2nd year in a row. In 1985, the Sooners won their 2nd straight league crown, and Tisdale picked up his 3rd straight Big Eight Player of the Year trophy.
I think even the opponents liked Wayman Tisdale because of his personality and his smile, a great smile. And he brought TV to the Big Eight Conference. That let people around the nation see what a good league we had. And then right on the heels of Wayman Tisdale, and even while he was there, you had a young man by the name of Danny Manning. And I thought those are the 2 guys, especially, that gave a lot of credit to the league because they brought the TV cameras with them.
Tisdale left a year early for the NBA, leaving the door open for Kansas to return to the top spot in 1986, its first title in 8 years. Larry Brown, who had worked wonders in the NBA and collegiately at UCLA, was at it again. Kansas finished at 35-4, and sophomore Danny Manning was named the Big 8 Player of the Year.
Danny was a great challenge to any team, but one thing that set Danny Manning apart, in my opinion, was he was a great, great shooter. Not only as a post player, but you could move him out to the wing or a guard, and he really could shoot the ball. He also had the great athletic ability to play so many positions that he was really a thorn in your side, regardless of whom on your team you decided you wanted to guard him with.
I thought Danny Manning was personified as the greatest student athlete, you know, that I might have coached against, because Danny played so unselfish, and he played inside, he played outside, he basically played 5 positions. And I thought the way Coach Larry Brown used him in those days, that he made everyone around him better, and then what he brought to the league was superstar status.
Many believe 1988 was the best year in Big 8 history, and with good reason, as 2 league teams made it all the way to the NCAA Finals. Oklahoma was the regular season champ and tied the 1986 Kansas team for most wins in a season at 35-4. Billy Tubbs' squad set a Big 8 record, averaging an astounding 103 points per game. The Jayhawks had been a preseason #1 pick, but 1 month from the Big 8 postseason tournament, a home loss to Oklahoma left Kansas 12-8 and unranked. To make matters worse, a loss to Kansas State prior to the Oklahoma loss ended the Jayhawks' Big 8 record 55-game home court winning streak. Larry Brown shuffled his lineup and asked Manning to shoulder more of the burden. The Jayhawks got back on track, winning 9 of their last 12, heading into the NCAA.
One great thing about Danny Manning is he's a team player and he makes all the other players better. And he understood that he couldn't do it alone, and he was very instrumental and very helpful in trying to get other players' confidence back. And he's a leader, and he made everybody feel like we could win.
Kansas and Kansas State were both placed in the Midwest Regional and fittingly met in the regional final. It was the 4th meeting of the season between the 2 rivals, with the winner advancing to the Final Four.
In light of the fact that just 3 weeks earlier in the Big 8 Conference tournament, we handled Kansas very easily and knocked them out. At that point, they were kind of ready for the season to end. However, they had regrouped, won some ball games in the tournament. Danny Manning really came forward and established himself as one of the premier players in the country. So psychologically, things had switched.
A stingy Kansas defense was the key to a 71-58 win, avenging the loss in the Big 8 tournament just a few weeks before.
But Kansas went instead of us, which with that big rivalry, you know, one thing to not go, but the other result, Kansas going, maybe hurt just as much.
The 1988 Final Four was indeed a showcase for college basketball. But not many were giving the Big 8 brethren much of a chance, picking Arizona or Duke to win it all. But in the semis, Kansas set out to prove the experts wrong, jumping all over Duke to lead 24-6 midway through the first half. The Blue Devils made a steady comeback, slicing the lead to 3 with 4 minutes left. Kevin Pritchard's fall away held off Duke's rally, and the Jayhawks headed to the finals. In the other semifinal, Oklahoma used its smothering press to beat Arizona. Mookie Blaylock, Oklahoma's defensive whiz, broke the NCAA season record for steals, while Stacey King and Harvey Grant combined for 42 points and 16 rebounds. And so the stage was set. 2 Big 8 teams would battle for the national championship in the city, which housed the Big 8 Conference office. The league could not have dreamed up a better scenario.
My philosophy is when I go to an event featuring 2 conference schools, that let it be a great one. We have no injuries, people play at their best, and it goes down to the last second, and the good guys, whoever might that be, win by 1 point.
As expected, the Sooners forced the pace early, but Kansas was able to match Oklahoma blow for blow. In one incredible half of college basketball, the 50th NCAA title game was tied 50-50 at halftime. The Jayhawks were red hot, hitting 71% of their first half shots.
Nobody thought that we could run with Oklahoma and beat them. And I don't think Coach Brown did either. In fact, the whole time during the first half, he always had that program rolled up. He was jumping up and down on the sideline, screaming at us to slow down, slow down. And so, I don't think it was an intentional strategy to run with them in the first half. But what happened in that game is we just ended up getting a lot of easy baskets, and they weren't getting back on defense. So we took advantage of the opportunities they gave us, and it was 50-50 at halftime. And at that point, Coach Brown said, "Look, we've got 20 minutes to play for the national championship," and just made it a 20-minute game instead of 40 minutes.
Once it was down to a 20-minute game, it came down to just a few plays, and Manning made the biggest ones, leading the Jayhawks to an 83-79 victory and the 1988 national championship.
Obviously, we lost that game, but I never credited our bad play with losing the game. I thought we played pretty good, but I thought Kansas played great in that game.
While Kansas was the champion, the big winner was the entire Big 8 Conference.
We told them for years that we were just as good as they were, and then when Kansas played Oklahoma in the finals, people began to realize that, hey, the Big 8 is really good in basketball, not only in football, but basketball too.
Big 8 fans knew 1988 would be impossible to duplicate, but Oklahoma remained a national power in 1989 behind All-American Stacey King. The Sooners climbed to the top of the polls on their way to the league title, and along with Missouri, Kansas State, and Iowa State, made the NCAA tournament. Prior to the start of the '89 season, Larry Brown opted for the NBA. His replacement was a little-known assistant from North Carolina. His name, Roy Williams. He became just the 7th coach in Kansas history.
I think I had a good idea of what the Big 8 was going to be, and that it was going to be a very competitive league. I think that Oklahoma and Kansas being a national championship game in '88 had done a lot with that, but I was so amazed the fan support, the intensity in the arenas, the truly great college atmosphere in every arena in our league, and I think that may be what sets it a little bit different from about every other league in the country.
The next decade brought a challenge to the league as the so-called experts were predicting the conference would fall off from its success of the late 1980s. It didn't take long to prove the naysayers wrong. On January 14, 1990, the national polls had Kansas number 1, Oklahoma number 4, and Missouri number 5. 3 teams in the top 5 in the nation.
The programs, the coaches, the great players that are on Missouri, on Oklahoma, and on Kansas at the time, it just was almost depressing because we really felt we were making strides here in Nebraska, but it wasn't shown by the level of competition. But again, I thought the greatness of some of those programs and those coaches and those great players pulled everyone up and helped, especially Nebraska, grow at the end.
You could go back to the 70s when the league was playing such great football, and you could pick up a Tuesday morning paper and you'd see 3 teams ranked like that in football. So what you had basically was just this transformation and it went from football to basketball.
For the last 2 months of the regular season, the 3 Big 8 teams took turns at the top. Twice, Missouri knocked off top-ranked Kansas to stake its own claim to number 1.
One team would be number 1. The next week, they'd have to play one of the contenders or go on the road. They'd lose. The other team would move up. The next week after that, they would play somebody and lose. In Oklahoma, it was Oklahoma, Missouri, and Kansas.
We beat Kansas, and Missouri moved up to number 1 in the nation, and we played them on Tuesday and beat them. So we were one of the few schools that we know of that won back-to-back games against number 1 team in the nation.
Missouri won the regular season, but the anything-can-happen excitement of the postseason tournament did happen to the Tigers in 1990, as 8-seed Colorado stunned top-seeded Missouri in the first round. Colorado continued its magic in the semifinals, knocking off Oklahoma State. In the finals, the Buffaloes couldn't pull off a 3rd straight upset, and Oklahoma took the title. The 1990-91 campaign saw the return of Eddie Sutton to coach his alma mater, Oklahoma State. Sutton's return was a triumphant one as he led the Cowboys to a share of the league title with Kansas.
I was raised out here in western Kansas and wouldn't have been able to go to school unless I'd gotten an athletic scholarship. And Mr. Iba gave me that opportunity, and Oklahoma State gave me the opportunity to get an education. And I felt like when I came back there that first year that I was able to give something back to my school. But I think it was really something special because to have Mr. Iba there every day at practice and to watch us win. And Oklahoma State had gone through some pretty tough times since he had stepped down. So, I mean, it was a lot of fun.
That 1991 season also marked the debut of a TV show that has become a big hit in the Big 8 region, Big Monday. Every Monday, ESPN showed the nation what Big 8 hoops was all about.
You know, it's the best time slot that you can have in college basketball because everybody follow Big East in the East Coast, Big East basketball. And, you know, it goes all the way to the West Coast, those young people out there on the West Coast. I think that's one reason Kansas keeps recruiting all those Californians is the fact that, you know, those kids can get home at 6:30 and they watch us play.
Our coaches immediately jumped at it. As you know, that another league had been there and they were a little concerned about Big Monday, but given the opportunity, and I'll say this, the athletic directors and the coaches in the Big 8 recognized what a great thing this would be for the conference.
Out of all the things in the league since I've been here, the most significant thing was us going on Big Monday and the time slot that we got, because on the West Coast I believe it was 6:30, on the East Coast it was 9:30, and it was just a perfect slot. And from top to bottom of our league, the whole league got exposure, the coaches, the players, the crowds, the facilities, and the Dick Vitales and all the announcers coming into these buildings and promoting Big 8 basketball.
In the postseason, Kansas made sure the league stayed in the national spotlight. The Jayhawks came back from a 12-point halftime deficit to defeat Arkansas and advanced to the Final Four for the 9th time in school history. Kansas' semifinal matchup was intriguing as it matched the teacher, Dean Smith, against the pupil, former Tar Heel assistant Roy Williams. The teacher jumped to an early lead, but a 17-1 spurt gave the Jayhawks a 9-point halftime lead. North Carolina cut it to 1 in the second half, but a late 7-0 run keyed the 79-73 Kansas win. Even though Duke beat Kansas in the finals, the win over North Carolina was an important one for Kansas and especially for Roy Williams. Oklahoma State put the Big 8 in the spotlight right away to tip off the 91-92 campaign, winning their first 20 games and climbing to number 2 in the national polls. Kansas eventually won its second straight title and won the Big 8 tournament as well. But the 1991-92 season may best be remembered in the Big 8 as the year that 5 league teams were ranked in the top 25 at the same time.
It's a proud time for all of us that are Big 8ers, because you sit around in coffee groups and you like to talk about the conferences and whatnot, and we're saying, look at the Big 8. We got 5 in the top 25.
For 4 or 5 years, it was the best. And it's hard to say that. But I think our records, the teams we played, and how we did and everything, we were the best.
The next season proved the previous one was no fluke. Kansas claimed its 3rd straight league title, and 6 teams again qualified for the NCAA tournament. Just 4 years prior, not many nationally knew who Roy Williams was, but a second trip to the Final Four in 1993 earned him wide acclaim. Kansas again faced its opponent from the 1991 semifinal, but this time, North Carolina prevailed by 10. Individually, fans saw the blossoming of Bryant Reeves, Oklahoma State's 7-foot sophomore center. Nicknamed Big Country, this small-town product became the first player since Wilt Chamberlain to lead the league in scoring, rebounding, and field goal percentage, and he was named the Big 8 MVP.
Bryant Reeves is a kind of a miracle story in my opinion, because when we recruited him, I don't think any of us, and certainly I didn't, feel like that there was any way that he was ever going to lead the Big 8 in scoring and rebounding. I didn't know whether it was a sophomore year or his senior year. But he just made remarkable progress from the time he stepped on our campus. And after the 4 years at Oklahoma State, well, he has to be one of the best centers ever played in this league. I think we probably helped him get started because we blew about a 15-point lead at home, and I think that gave them a lot of confidence, and they went on and won every game. And that was a great team, great coaching job at Norm, and I'll be very surprised if anybody ever goes undefeated again.
It is extremely tough, and some people will say it's almost impossible. That was a very unique ball club. I think everybody should at one time, if they coach, have that privilege of being around a group of youngsters that might not be quite as talented as some other teams that you may have had, or it might not be as talented as the teams in the league, but for some reason they have what we call chemistry, or they have the ability to win, and that was truly the way that ball club was. They were greater than the sum of the parts.
Going into that season, Nebraska was motivated by predictions that the Cornhuskers would finish at the bottom of the league and continued to use that as a rallying cry in the postseason.
Well, being picked last really shook me up, and I asked the media, I remember distinctly asking me, why would you pick us last? I really felt we had the potential of having a great team. We had a lot of veterans back. But it really bothered the coaching staff and our players, the lack of respect, because people just didn't give us any respect. And we went on, you know, we were a contender, won 26 games. We use it as a motivator, and the phrase we use, we want it to be a piece of history. We wanted to be the first Nebraska basketball team to win the Big 8 tournament.
One Cornhusker who took that to heart was Eric Piatkowski, whose 42 points in an opening round win over Oklahoma set a tournament single-game record. Piatkowski stayed in the zone for the rest of the tournament, leading Nebraska to its first tournament championship.
It was better than I thought it would be because it gave us national recognition and gave us respect. And with the programs like Kansas and Missouri and Oklahoma State and the great programs they had, it finally gave us national recognition. When we won that, we got more respect when we went out on the road recruiting, and people knew that Nebraska had a good program.
Change was the operative word in '95 as 3 new coaches entered the league. The new breed provided no let-up in competition, just as in 1993, 5 teams were rated at the same time. The race came down to the final day of the regular season, with Kansas beating Oklahoma State for the title. It was the Jayhawks' 4th regular season title in 5 years. After an impressive 66-52 win over Alabama in the second round, the Cowboys advanced to the Sweet 16 to face 4th-ranked Wake Forest. Once again, Bryant Reeves, Randy Rutherford, and team defense led to a 71-66 Cowboy win. The journey to the Final Four was secured as the Cowboys neutralized a powerful Massachusetts front line en route to a 68-54 win. The Cowboys fell to eventual national champion UCLA in a semifinal game 74-61. But the Final Four appearance was the 25th for the Big 8 and the 5th for Oklahoma State. If you've enjoyed the 89 years from the Missouri Valley to the Big 6 to the Big 7 and finally to the Big 8, sit back and enjoy the Big 12. Its proud history will lead to a promising future.
Well, this is the way we used to dress for road trips in the Big 7.
Well, I think the favorite story, I wasn't involved in it, but Tubbs was involved in it down in Oklahoma when they were playing, I think, Missouri, and the refs were having a very difficult time, and Tubbs got on the microphone and says, "Don't boo them. They can't help themselves," or something like that. And we went wild, and then Tubbs got suspended.
He actually told me, gave me a choice. I would either go to the scores table and tell people not to throw anything on the floor, or I'd get a technical. So I decided to do both, and that's the night I made the statement, regardless of how terrible the officiating is, please don't throw anything on the floor. And I have comment to this day on that particular statement, and it wasn't so funny at the time, but as you look back, it was kind of funny now, I think.